program was originally scheduled for the United Nations Non-Proliferation Review in 2020. So glad we are able to bring you all in on the conversation. Thanks to Paul Perez and Kathy Hewitt for making this possible. We welcome all of you. At last count, I think last night there were 180 people. This is a 2-hour program. First will be Dr. Halfhand talking about the nature of nuclear weapons. And in the second half, beginning at 10 Central, we will have Taro Drozenka and David Combs speaking about how Rotarians can be involved in this process. Richard Denton will monitor the chat room. You can send messages to other participants privately or to the group and post your questions to the speakers on the chat room. Richard will be monitoring. Thank you, Richard. Note that the participants are muted, so there's no room for posing questions yourself. We will be back again to be together, so we'll stay in touch and have some more opportunity. So after the welcome from the DGs, the Reg for Peace organizers will proceed through the program through to the close at 11 o'clock. Please stay as long as you can. But before we go to greetings, I want to acknowledge everybody. Yes, everybody. So please wave to be recognized. My subcommittee, please wave. Organizers, Namrata, Sheila, Sweta, Chan, Johnsy, and Richard, please wave. 2 among the subcommittee, Dennis Wong and Al Jubitz, are founders of the Rotary Action Group for Peace. We have civil society observers, both Rotary Action Group and 6 others. Very cool. Alice Slater, also a civil society observer, has been part of this movement for decades. And 1 UN delegate to the Non-Proliferation Review 2020 is Rosalind Cook from the UK. Please wait. So we have participants from Rotary District 5960, please wave. And again, everybody from the United States. Now we go to India, say hello, Canada, Senegal, Netherlands, Pakistan, Nigeria, Uganda, Scotland, please wave. And among you are Rotarians, friends or family, Rotaract, Interact, and Rotary Peace Fellows. And if I missed you, please wave. Our organizers are all here with our DGs and our club presidents. Thank you so much. Paul Perez will welcome you.
Thank you, Ann. My name is Paul Perez, and I'm the current district governor for District 5960. And on behalf of President John Shannon from the Rotary Club of White Bear Lake, we welcome you. Our district covers part of Minnesota and Wisconsin in the United States. And I want to thank everyone who had a hand in putting this together, this wonderful event, but want to have a special thank you to Ann Frisch, who is our Rotary International Peace Champion, who's been a champion of this event. So thank you so much for all you've done. Today we come together to connect the world as we try to make a difference for everyone. And this is being co-hosted not only by our district, but districts from Canada and also from India. So I would like to welcome several of my classmates who will also serve as hosts for this important event. First, from District 3020, we have Virabhadra Reddy and Rotarian TVT Gandhi, President, Rotary Club, Visakhapatnam, Andhra Pradesh, India. So District Governor Reddy, if you could take yourself off mute and say a few words to welcome our guests.
Thank you, Governor. This is Virabhadra Reddy, alias Bobby, from Governor 3020. Thank you, Ann Frisch, for keeping this platform on the nuclear weapon education. Actually, we're after facing some disasters by the nuclear weapons as well as the nuclear reactor leakages or spillages. We have to focus on the threat by the nuclear weapons now and the consequences by the weapons if they are used. Actually, we have to bear in mind that human beings and nuclear weapons cannot be coexist parallelly. After Hiroshima and Nagasaki, we learned so much about the nuclear weapons. Now the situations are entirely different. By the time in 1945, when the weapon, used on Hiroshima or Nagasaki, the weapon size is very less, the population is very less. But whereas now, the weapon sizes are multiplied, the populations also are multiplied. Now we are in 2020, and we have to focus on the disastrous movement if the weapons are exist in the world. That's why we, the Rotarians, definitely act on nuclear weapons, and we have to fight against that. Thank you for giving me the opportunity in this platform. Bye.
Thank you, District Governor Reddy. Welcome District 3011 and District Governor Suresh Basan and Rotarian Ankur Garg, President, Rotary Club, Delhi Midwest, New Delhi, India. Do we have District Governor Basan here to say a few words? I don't know if he was signed up. Do we have Rotarian Ankur Garg who wants to say a few words or do a quick welcome? Unmute yourself, please. Do we have anyone else from District 3011 who would like to say a welcome? Please unmute yourself.
No, you guys go ahead with the meeting. I think it's okay, fine.
Okay, thank you. Next, we want to welcome District 3181 and District Governor Joseph Matthew and Rotarian Reginald Wesley, President, Rotary Club Mysore West, Mysore Karnataka, India. DG Matthew, would you like to say a few words? Please unmute yourself.
Hello. Hello. Hello.
Yes, sir, you are audible. Yes, Matthew, go ahead.
Yeah. Good evening. I am Joseph Matthew from RI District 3181. This is the southern part of India. We have around 3,700 members and 81 clubs in our district. At the outset, let me congratulate on behalf of my district Rotarian and for organizing this wonderful meeting. Nuclear disarmament is a topic that should be discussed any day because we have seen the effects of nuclear bombing in Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Even today, the people are suffering because of that. And our intention is not to destroy the world, but our intention is to construct or be constructive. And in this concept, I think any sort of disarmament, whether it is nuclear or other disarmament, other armed race should be stopped, because we are, using or we are funding or we are giving a lot of funds for the, accumulating a lot of weapons. And if that money can be used in a productive manner, I think we can do wonderful projects and bring wonderful humanity. And the concept of Rotary, we can say that the service and the fellowship can be much been highlighted if you could bring in those money that is used in the accumulation of nuclear weapons to a productive manner. And I think in this concept, this today's meeting and the further meetings that is going to happen after this will be quite meaningful. And I wish all the organizers, sorry, all the best. And I hope that there will be a better result we can expect from this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, DG Matthew. Next, we want to welcome District 7010 and past District Governor Margaret Walton and Rotarian Rick McKenzie, President of Rotary Club Sudbury, Ontario, Canada. District Governor Walton, please say a few words and welcome our guests.
Thank you very much. It's my pleasure to be here. And I bring greetings from District Governor Bill Hagborg and our District Peace Chair, Dr. Richard Denton, who's been an instrumental part of the process. District 710 is a vast district covering thousands of square miles in Canada, in the provinces of Ontario and Quebec. We're a bilingual district, and we work actively together to promote peace and understanding through building strong communities. We see the world as one and are committed to removing the threats to a peaceful world. And I really look forward to working with this group and supporting the actions to try and educate the world about the threats of nuclear armament. And I second my previous speaker's comments about how if we could just reconvert the resources we use for war to peace, what a wonderful world we would have. So thank you very much for this opportunity, and greetings from Canada.
Thank you, past District Governor Walton. Next, we want to welcome District 3150 and District Governor Sivanarayana Raupandi and Rotarian Murthy Vadapalli from Jubilee Hills. He's the president of Jubilee Hills, Hyderabad, Telangana, India. District Governor Sivanarayana, would you like to welcome the guests? And then we'll have a welcome from President Vadapalli.
I guess our district governor is having some challenges connecting, so maybe he'll join a little later.
You can welcome us and say a few words,
Yes.
Murthy, please.
Yeah, very good evening to all, and let me start with thanking Anne for putting this up together and giving us this great opportunity to be a part of this program. And being a co-host, we consider it a privilege. To run you quickly through an introduction of Rotary Club of Jubilee Hills, we are a 30-year-old club started in 1989. And we are the largest club in Twin Cities with about more than 124 members and growing. We carry out a very wide variety of community service, including, building homes for the homeless, providing support for government schools, and doing varied healthcare projects in terms of health checkups and corrections. Our prestigious and a long-term project is our Learning Center building. It's our own building which we have come up with. This is for skill development and employability empowerment for the deserving from weaker section. And we're also sponsoring Retract and Interact clubs to build the future Rotarians. Now, I actually take this pride to recognize Rotarian Jhansi Premanand, who's amidst us. She's the first lady Rotarian of District 3150 when Rotarians started accepting women to become members, and the first woman president of the 8 women presidents of our club. And she's one of the very early members of Bequest Society from this district, and very well known for her generosity in contributing for TRF. And we take pride in saying that she's one of our members. And of course, the very well known name in the Rotary international circles, our past district governor, Sam Patibandla, who is a member of the Indian National Polio Plus Committee, and then right now the Assistant Rotary International Coordinator for, he's been the Rotary International Coordinator for Polio Program. And with this kind of stalwarts, our club has been very active in the district, and we never, wait for opportunities. We build opportunities and in doing good for the world. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Thank you, everyone. And thank you to my, my fellow classmates for being here and helping co-host this. So I'll turn it over. Thank you.
Thank you.
Namaste, Chand Kolovenu I am. I'm from Rotary Club Vishakhapatnam. I'm actually a subcommittee member of Rotary Action Group for Peace, Nuke Free Planet, Nuclear Weapon Educating. And also I'm Rotary District 3020, Rotary Peace Chairman through Nuclear Weapon Education. I'm here now. I take the pleasure of introducing Dr. Ira Halfhand. Dr. Ira Halfhand, MD, member of E-Club of V Rotary, is a member of the International Steering Group of the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapon, ICAN, the recipient of the 2017 Nobel Peace Prize and co-president of the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War, the founding partner of ICAN and itself, the recipient of the 1985 Nobel Peace Prize. He is also co-founder and past president of Physicians for Social Responsibility, IPPNW's US affiliate. He has published studies on the medical consequences of nuclear war, major international medical journals, and has lectured widely in the United States, in India, China, Japan, Korea, Russia, South Africa, Israel, Pakistan, Mexico, Brazil, Colombia, and throughout Europe on the health effects on nuclear weapons. Member of the Rotary Action Group for Peace Subcommittee on Nuclear Weapons. Dr. Ira Halfhand lectured in 2018 in Delhi in an event co-chaired by subcommittee member Namrata Suri. Now I present Dr. Ira for giving us an excellent speech.
Thank you, John, for that introduction, and thanks to Anne for initiating this event, and to all of you for participating. Talking about nuclear weapons is never pleasant, and I'm always impressed when people are willing to take the time and to spend an evening talking about this instead of doing something that's more pleasant. I have, in recent times, sort of comforted myself a bit when imposing this information on people with the thought that at the current moment we really face a choice. We can either talk about nuclear war and do something about it and prevent it, or we can actually have a nuclear war, which would be far more terrible. And as hard as it is for us to really accept that that is a real possibility, it is. And that's, I think, the most important thing that we need to understand. In that regard, the COVID epidemic may be of some great use to us. You know, even 3 or 4 or 5 months ago, experts were telling us it was only a matter of time until the next great pandemic engulfed the world. Nobody was paying attention to them. Now people, I think, are beginning to understand that when the scientific and medical experts say something really bad is going to happen if we don't take action, we need to listen to them and we need to take action, or else something really bad may in fact happen. So I think the epidemic, even though it is diverting our attention a great deal, it also is creating something of a teachable moment for us, an opportunity for us to reach people who previously just could not focus on the danger of nuclear war because it just seemed too terrible and something which was just, it just couldn't happen. That's the way our minds work. When something seems that terrible, we just sort of say, well, it can't happen. I'm wonderfully happy to have this chance to talk with fellow Rotarians, because I think that Rotary has an extraordinarily important role to play in the work of preventing nuclear war. Tara and David are going to talk more explicitly in the second part of this program about what it is that we as Rotarians can do, but I would tend to look at the remarks I'm going to share with you now as something of a commercial for what they're going to tell you. I'm trying to create the idea that we really need to listen to their suggestions. The very first talk I ever gave about the nuclear problem was to my father's Rotary Club back in 1977, right after I had graduated from medical school. And over the years, I've spoken with many Rotary clubs in person, but I think I really understood the importance of bringing Rotary into this issue at a meeting of the World Medical Association in Durban, South Africa in 2013, when one of the speakers gave a report on the ongoing effort to eliminate polio. And he reported that on a single day, Rotary clubs in India had immunized 180 million children against polio. An absolutely mind-boggling number to me, and something which sort of rang little bells in my head, that an organization that can carry out 180 million immunizations in a single day has enormous power to do good. It is committed to eliminating major threats to public health like polio. Surely this organization can and must play a role in eliminating the even greater threat to public health that is posed by nuclear weapons. And over the last 7 years since then, have had the opportunity to work with many wonderful Rotarians from around the world who are increasingly of the opinion that this great international organization, this brotherhood and sisterhood, needs to become active if we are going to move past the current very dangerous moment. Let me talk for just a few minutes about why this moment is so dangerous, and then I want to talk to you for a few minutes about what is at stake, what's going to happen if we don't succeed in preventing nuclear war. A generation ago in the 1980s, everybody understood how bad nuclear weapons were and how imminent and enormous the threat they posed was. There were literally millions of people on every continent demanding an end to the Cold War arms race. And that enormous mobilization of civil society played a decisive role in bringing about that change, in ending the Cold War arms race, and I believe in saving the world. We were on the brink of nuclear war repeatedly in the 1980s. And in a miraculously short period of time, in response to this unprecedented public outpouring of opposition to nuclear arms, the leadership of the two great nuclear superpowers of that time, the United States and the Soviet Union, came to a stunning agreement to stop their arms race, to stop building more nuclear weapons, to begin dismantling their arsenals, and they came close to actually reaching an agreement to eliminate them altogether, although that last step eluded them. They could not bring about that final agreement. When the Cold War ended, the whole world began to act as though the problem of nuclear weapons had gone away. As we all know, it never did. Thousands of nuclear weapons remained. There are still about 14,000 in the world, 13,500. And the danger was always there. But over the last few years, that danger has grown again, to the point where experts are now telling us that the possibility of nuclear war is greater today than it was at the worst moments of the Cold War. And this is the opinion that has been put forward by William Perry, the former United States Secretary of Defense, who is one of the wisest scholars of the nuclear problem. It is a judgment that was echoed by the panel of experts at the Bulletin of the Atomic Scientists, who reset their doomsday clock in January of this year to 100 seconds to midnight. Now, this is the closest that the atomic scientists have ever said we are to nuclear war. And their judgments, I think, flow from a number of geopolitical factors. United States-Russian relations, which were pretty good for 10 or 15 years after the end of the Cold War, are now the worst they have been in 30 years. And both countries are engaged in an arms race to develop new nuclear weapons, something we never thought we would see again. They engage in very hostile rhetoric that is replete with threats of the use of nuclear weapons. It's like someone's replaying Cold War tapes for us. And it's a very dangerous situation. Relations between the United States and China, the world's two largest economies, are also in a very bad state, probably the worst they've been in 40 years. And there is an explicitly military dimension to this situation. US and Chinese forces engage each other in a game of chicken in the South China Sea on a regular basis. one could easily imagine scenarios in which an incident there spirals out of control. And the threat of a nuclear conflict between these two great powers is also something which is growing and which contributes to the overall danger. The situation in North Korea is one which I think we're all familiar with. It has received a great deal of media attention over the last several years and remains completely unstable. The North Korean military nuclear program continues forward, and it's not clear how this is going to play out. The danger that I worry about the most is the one which many of you on this call I think are also most familiar with, which is the terribly unstable situation between India and Pakistan and South Asia. Twice last year, crises erupted, which brought the two countries to the brink of war. Everything that I understand, and I'm not a scholar of South Asian issues, but the people here in the States who I speak to regularly from both India and Pakistan are of the opinion that if there is another war between India and Pakistan, it will almost certainly involve the use of nuclear weapons. And the studies which have been done, which you are all probably familiar with, show that the effects of such a war in South Asia will be unbelievably catastrophic. In 2006, the group of climate scientists I work with here in the US looked at the possibility of a war between India and Pakistan in which each side uses 50 Hiroshima-sized nuclear weapons. And they concluded that that war would lead within a week to the death of 20 million people as a direct result of the explosions and the fires and the radiation. But that same group revisited this scenario in September of last year, taking into account the much larger arsenals that both India and Pakistan possess, and the much larger population of the cities that would be targets of these weapons. And their new study concludes that the immediate consequences in South Asia would be anywhere from 75 to 125 million people dead in a week from the fires, from the explosions, from the radiation. But in addition to these direct casualties, the fires caused by this war would loft something between 15 and 35 million tons of soot into the upper atmosphere, dropping temperatures across the entire planet an average of 5.4 degrees centigrade. This is an absolutely catastrophic climate disruption, which would trigger agricultural failure across the world, not just in South Asia, but everywhere, and would lead to a global famine, the dimensions of which we have not yet calculated. Back in 2006, we estimated that that smaller war, which would cause much less climate disruption, would put up to 2 billion people around the planet at risk of starvation. The current data suggests that the climate disruption could be 2 to 3 times larger, with some significant further increase in the effect on food production and on the numbers of people who face starvation. This is an incredibly dangerous situation, and one which could develop quickly within a matter of hours or days without us having much chance, once the conflict began, to do anything about it. And so it's terribly important that we take action beforehand to keep that from ever happening. A war between the United States and Russia, which is also a very real possibility, would be even more terrible. Something like 300 to 400 million people would die in the first week, and the ultimate deaths from famine could involve the vast majority of the human race. It's possible that a war between the United States and Russia would lead to the extinction of our species. We need to understand, this is not some kind of a nightmare scenario like the plot for a movie. This really is the future that we face if we don't take action. Even if no country makes a specific decision to launch a nuclear war, we have come to the brink of nuclear war by accident on at least 7 occasions that we know about. Occasions in which either the United States or Russia began the actual process of launching their nuclear arsenals, always in the mistaken belief that they were under attack by the other side. And on each of these occasions, we came within minutes of the kind of large-scale nuclear war that I was just describing. And on each of these occasions, we were saved not because we had wise leaders or because we had perfect technology or a sound military doctrine. We were saved because we were unbelievably lucky. Robert McNamara, the former US Secretary of Defense during the Vietnam War, said repeatedly during the nuclear weapons era, we lucked out. It is luck that prevented nuclear war. And the current nuclear policies of all 9 nuclear armed states, I believe, are essentially nothing more than a hope for continued good luck, which is an intolerable basis for global security policy. As long as these weapons exist, we are hoping that we'll be lucky. And we are in fact living on borrowed time, and that time is going to run out. So it is imperative from a humanitarian perspective that we eliminate these weapons as quickly as we possibly can, that we bring all 9 nuclear armed states into joint negotiations for a verifiable, enforceable, time-bound process to dismantle the 14,000 nuclear warheads that exist today. This is something we can do. Nuclear weapons are not, they're not a force of nature. They're little machines. We have dismantled more than 50,000 of them already. We know how to do this. And the question is, will we make the political decision to dismantle the weapons, or will we let them continue to exist until they are used in a catastrophic war which destroys everything that we hold precious? Now, normally when I speak to people about this, one of the problems is that individuals hearing this information feel overwhelmed. You know, what can I as an individual do? It's an enormous problem and I'm one person. We in Rotary are in a different situation. We are not lone individuals. We belong to this international organization with 1.2 million members. There are Rotary clubs, I think, in every country in the world except North Korea. We have an extraordinary ability to work with our brothers and sisters across the planet on this problem. And I think it is imperative that Rotary figure out how we can best do this. Now, there has been some opposition or some resistance, let me say, within Rotary to Rotary getting involved in the nuclear weapons issue. And I understand that. There are many people around the world who still believe that nuclear weapons make us safe, and they are not enthusiastic about getting rid of these weapons. And so an effort within Rotary to bring about nuclear abolition will be somewhat controversial. I don't think it should be. I think getting rid of nuclear weapons should be as straightforward a question as getting rid of polio, but that isn't the reality. There are people who believe, I think mistakenly, that these weapons are a source of security. So we do encounter some resistance within Rotary. And I think our job, those of us who understand fully what these weapons are going to do and the urgency of eliminating them, our job is to continue to educate our fellow Rotarians through meetings like this, through discussions in our individual clubs, in our individual districts, and to slowly, not too slowly, and to quickly bring about the consensus that we need within Rotary, so that individual Rotarians can take action as Rotarians, and so that hopefully in the near future, Rotary International as an organization can take action. And I do want to clarify that slip I made when I said slowly a minute ago, because I don't think we can move slowly. I think time is not on our side. The danger is great, and the time frame we have to address it is very short. And we need to be tactful, we need to be diplomatic, but we need to move with all deliberate speed, both within Rotary and in approaching our governments to get them all to take action. Now, there is a framework for global action. The International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons, as a key civil society partner, worked with countries around the planet to bring into being the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which was adopted at the UN on July 7th, 2017, by a vote of 122-1, with 1 abstention. That treaty, when 50 countries have ratified it, will become international law. We are now at, I believe, 38 countries ratifying, and hope that the treaty will enter into force later this year or early next year. None of the nuclear armed states have signed the treaty. None of them have a present intention of doing so. And for those of us who live in countries like Pakistan, India, the United States, that is the key challenge, to get our governments to move in this direction. And it is, I guess, in a sense, a political question in that we're talking about change in policy. But this certainly should never be seen as a partisan political question. We're not talking about one group or another group gaining some special advantage through the course of action we are promoting. We're talking about a course of action that is necessary to save humanity. And I think if we approach it from that perspective, if we talk about this as the great humanitarian crisis of our era, which it is, I think we can bring people along and get them to understand the need for we in Rotary, as Rotarians, as an organization, to take on this issue. So let me stop here, and I would be happy to answer any questions about the specifics of what I've talked about, more importantly, to engage in any conversation about people's thoughts about what we can do.
Thank you very, very much, Ira. Some questions are starting to come into the chat line, and I encourage anyone with questions, please write them into the chat line, and I will relay them on to Ira. We have a first question here from El Maruf Mohammed from Nigeria. How do non-nuclear countries play a role in eliminating nuclear weapons? And why do we need to pile up so many nuclear weapons in the first place?
I think the non-nuclear armed states can play an enormous role putting pressure on the countries that have nuclear weapons. And that's essentially what the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons was all about. It was understood from the onset of the negotiations that we were not going to get the nuclear armed states involved right away. But it was felt that the non-nuclear armed states needed to make it clear that they will no longer accept the situation where 9 countries are holding the entire world hostage. And in fact, the leadership for this treaty has come exclusively from non-nuclear armed states, many in the global south, countries, many specifically in Africa and Latin America, both of which are nuclear weapons-free continents, continents where the nations had had the wisdom to completely ban nuclear weapons, and where for many years, I think the governments felt they had dealt with the nuclear problem. They had made their countries safe from nuclear war. But countries which now realize that the global climate effects that I was talking about earlier mean that even a nuclear war far from their borders will have devastating effects for their people. And so countries like Nigeria specifically can play an enormous role in bringing the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons into effect, gaining the necessary 50 ratifications, and then continuing to use the message of this treaty at meetings of the Non-Proliferation Treaty, at meetings of the UN General Assembly. We need to, the phrase that we've used is we need to stigmatize nuclear weapons. At the moment, many nuclear armed countries view their nuclear arsenal as a source of national pride. They're part of the big boy club that runs the world. We need to create a situation where countries that have nuclear weapons are looked on appropriately as rogue states that threaten humanity and countries which need to be dealt with. And I think that's the role that the non-nuclear armed states can play.
Thank you very much, Ira. This one in from Ashra Ashokan. How can we, Rotarians and civil societies, ensure that the Non-Proliferation Treaty has a strong implementation strategy and compliance mechanism, especially considering the politics involved among member states in the UN Security Council? For instance, in terms of sanctions or mechanisms for violating the treaty objectives. And also when states that have still not ratified the NPT, India, Pakistan, etc., and how ready are civil society or international organizations like Rotary lend substantial support in this campaign and in ensuring ending violent methods of conflict resolution? How can we improve the trust between nations?
Well, I don't think we're going to be able to get the nuclear armed states to give up their arsenals until they conclude a further negotiation amongst themselves. The rest of the world can apply pressure. It can apply moral pressure, diplomatic pressure, some economic pressure. But ultimately, these 9 countries are going to need to come up with a more detailed agreement than exists in either the NPT or the TPNW, an agreement which specifies the specific verification procedures, the enforcement mechanisms, and the timetable for eliminating the weapons. There are models for this. The United States and the Soviet Union, the United States and Russia have done a series of treaties providing for the partial elimination of the nuclear arsenals that have had these sorts of features built into them. And those treaties provide something of a model for the multilateral treaty that now needs to be negotiated. Those negotiations may take place in the context of the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, or they may take place outside of that treaty framework. And I don't think it makes a big difference as long as the 9 nuclear states get together and conduct these negotiations and bring them to a successful conclusion. They don't want to do this. We have to create a totally different political climate across the planet, and particularly in the nuclear armed states, that makes it impossible for the leadership to ignore their responsibility to protect people from these weapons. So I think the key still lies with the nuclear armed states, and the key to changing policy there lies with the citizens of those countries, but also of the rest of the world, insofar as they can contribute to the pressure which these governments feel.
Thank you very much. This one in from Al Jubitz, who you know, Ira. We have an opportunity to influence Rotary International President nominee Shekhar Mehta from India on this subject. Has anyone reached out to RI President nominee Mehta? And I just also saw that the former questionnaire, Ashra, who's a Peace Fellow, is going to be doing that. But I'm just wondering again, Ira, if you could comment on how Rotary now can play a key role in this position.
Well, I think we clearly need to reach out to all of the Rotary leadership, present and future. And I do not particularly have a relationship with the nominee, but I think that many people on this conference may, and I would invite any of them who have tried to speak with him to speak up, please.
Thank you. This one in from my own past district governor, Margaret Walton. Where do corporations that benefit financially from the production of arms fit in this effort to prohibit nuclear weapons?
Well, part of the ICANN campaign has been a project within that campaign called Don't Bank on the Bomb, which seeks to identify the companies which are profiting from the manufacture of nuclear weapons and the banks and other financial institutions which facilitate the work of those companies by financing them and encouraging depositors in the banks, shareholders in the companies, to put pressure on these companies to stop their activity. And I think it's an extremely useful campaign, and it has its own website, Don't Bank on the Bomb, which people who are interested in this kind of work, I would encourage you to look at those websites. The financial interest of companies that profit off of manufacturing nuclear weapons is clearly a very important factor in driving this process forward. I don't think it's the decisive factor. I think the decisive factor is the desire of the political leadership in the countries that possess these weapons to continue to be able to bully the rest of the world through the possession of these weapons. But it is one of several factors that we need to address. And many people have found this to be a very fruitful line of work, organizing to put pressure on the financial institutions. It creates direct pressure, and it's also a very useful educational vehicle for pointing out which companies are facilitating this really unacceptable behavior of maintaining nuclear arsenals.
And maybe I could just add, Ira, that organizations like Rotary does have a lot of money invested in various numbers of equity. And currently we are invested in General Dynamics, which is one of the 30 companies that does produce nuclear weapons. And again, it would be fairly easy for Rotary to divest of General Dynamics. A couple of other questions I'll just put to you, Ira. This one from Nina Potter. If the use of nuclear weapons is suicidal, deter really isn't valid anymore. And I'll ask this other one, Peter Schneeberger, sorry about the pronunciation. Why don't we work for reduction instead of elimination? Elimination may be a bridge too far at the current point of time.
Two very good questions. On the deterrence question first, I think the point is exactly right. Deterrence doesn't work, and it's not because nuclear war would be suicidal. That's what's supposed to deter us, that no one would do this. But the fact of the matter is we know of multiple occasions when nuclear armed states have prepared to use nuclear weapons. Deterrence in that sense has already failed. And it wasn't this wise doctrine that kept us from blowing up the world on the multiple occasions when the US or Russia started to launch their nuclear weapons. It was, as I said, as Robert McNamara said, just luck that kept us from ending the world. Deterrence is a myth. It's a powerful one. People have bought into this and they want to believe that these weapons make us safe. But the truth, which is easily explained to people, shows something quite different. With regards to the question of why not go for reductions, I think it's inherent in some of the things that I've been saying. Even the nuclear war scenario in South Asia that I talked about before, that could kill 75 to 125 million people in a week and cause a global famine that might kill more than 2 billion people. That war requires the use of less than 0.5% of the world's nuclear arsenals, which means that even enormous reductions do not make us safe from this potential civilization-ending catastrophe. We have to be really clear-cut with people. The number of weapons that you could safely have in the world is 0. And anything more than that poses an unacceptable risk. We do need to go to smaller numbers on the way to 0, and agreements to do that are certainly important steps forward. But we cannot lose sight of the urgent need to get to 0 as quickly as possible, because even a tiny fraction of the world's nuclear arsenal, if used against cities, could be the end of modern civilization and would cause suffering unparalleled in human history.
Thank you, Ira. This one in from Sjors Biekner from the Netherlands. You mentioned that there are 9 countries, nuclear countries, but could you include all NATO members? The main step might be to get one of those members to go against the stream. Which country would that be?
Well, there are a number of nuclear umbrella countries, countries that have special relations with the United States, which has essentially promised to use its nuclear weapons to defend them. NATO, Japan, South Korea, and Australia. And these countries play an important role in propping up the system. NATO in particular plays an enormously important role. And were countries in NATO to call for the abolition of nuclear weapons, to join the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, it would have an enormous impact. The Netherlands is probably the country most likely to do this. The Parliament has clearly expressed that it wants the Netherlands to join the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. And despite that, the parliamentary government has refused to carry out that directive. Work in countries like the Netherlands, in some of the other NATO countries like Spain and Norway, the United Kingdom, which might change the nuclear policy, is extremely important. And it would be a tremendous step forward if any of the nuclear umbrella countries renounced that position and called for the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons to enter into force.
Thank you, Ira. This one in from Frances Jeffries, who you know, she's a Peace Fellow. How can Rotary use its position in the UN to abolish nuclear weapons?
Well, I think this speaks to the whole question of Rotary's responsibility to take up the nuclear weapons question. Rotary is one of 2 NGOs that have formal status at the UN. The other is the Red Crescent movement. And the Red Crescent movement has been extremely active in advocating for the abolition of nuclear weapons, which has been called for by the United Nations in multiple treaties. Rotary has not. And this is perhaps a context in which we can discuss Rotary's role with Rotary leadership. By failing to talk about the need to abolish nuclear weapons, we are in a sense failing in our responsibility as an NGO with UN accreditation to promote the agenda which the United Nations has agreed to overwhelmingly, not just in the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons signed by 122 countries, but the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which more than 190 countries are parties to that treaty. That treaty also requires the nuclear armed states to negotiate the elimination of their arsenals, something which they clearly are not doing. So I think that Rotary's position within the UN both gives us an opportunity to do work there, but more importantly, it gives us a way of approaching Rotary and arguing for the need for Rotary to take action on this issue.
Thank you, Ira. I have a question from Nishka Jashwal about artificial intelligence and robots here. She says, living robot named Xenobot has been developed using the stem cells of a frog. These managed by supercomputers with algorithms. These are self-repairable on any destruction. May it create a threat to the life of human on further progress like live bombs, nuclear or hydrogen bombs?
There are a number of emerging threats to our well-being that we're going to need to deal with. Artificial intelligence is one of them. Bioengineering is another. These are enormously powerful technologies which may be able to do very wonderful things for humanity, but which, if misapplied, may be able to cause enormous harm to humanity. And we are going to have to deal with all of these. But at the moment, the nuclear threat, I think, is the one which requires our most urgent attention. Right now, while we are having this conference, a nuclear war could be unfolding between the United States and Russia, between India and Pakistan, between the United States and China. That's the level of urgency that we need to view this problem with. And I think it is totally appropriate to be working on these other issues as well. But I think I would argue that whatever else we're doing with our lives, we have got to address the nuclear weapons problem, because if we are not successful in a relatively short time period in eliminating these weapons, they are going to eliminate us. And then we're not going to have to worry about any of the other threats that are emerging.
Thank you, Ira. This one in from Raghu Alam. Can Rotary ask Japan to take the lead, and Rotary across the world can push the nuclear disarmament message with the public and state leaders?
Well, civil society in Japan has played an enormous role throughout the nuclear weapons era in reminding us of the danger of nuclear war. And I would certainly hope that Rotary in Japan would be in the forefront of our efforts to mobilize Rotary and to mobilize the global community for the last step that we need to take, these negotiations to eliminate these weapons once and for all.
This one from Pratik. Now we are faced with one more threat to humanity, the pandemic virus spread. It has a potential to blow up to a full-scale threat to the entire globe. So in your opinion, could it be used in place of nuclear weapons?
This pandemic or an engineered bio weapon in the future could cause enormous destruction to the human family. One could imagine a pandemic in particular, not the current virus, but some other agent that would be developed as a weapon that could pose the same kind of truly global threat that nuclear weapons pose. And that's something that we need to be vigilant about. Biological weapons have been banned by treaty. That does not mean that they cannot be developed by people who are intent on developing them. And they are a serious threat which we need to be worried about. But again, at the moment, I think the thing that we need to focus on is the nuclear threat while keeping an eye out for other emerging threats to our future well-being.
Thank you again. Ramaya has his hand up. Can you unmute and ask your question?
Ramayyaru, please unmute yourself and speak.
Okay, while he's waiting to unmute, I'll ask another question from David Newman, who you know. Ira, Council on Legislation and the Council on Resolutions of Rotary International can be used by all districts to abolish nuclear weapons. District 5550 is using this process. Are other districts doing the same?
David, I think you know more about this than I do. If there's something that you can share with us about this, it would be great. I suspect this will be part of the discussion in the second half of the program, which we're about to start in a couple of minutes.
Did you want to unmute, Dave?
Yes, thank you so much, Ira, for a wonderful, instructive and motivating talk. My hope is that every district in India and Pakistan and Nigeria and Netherlands will consider using the representative they have in their districts to support the abolition of nuclear weapons through a process which their district must approve before a deadline. The deadline for Council on Resolutions is June 30th. And the district must, at an annual general meeting, pass a resolution designed to go to the past district governor representatives of the district who are part of the Council on Legislation and Council on Resolutions group. I call it like the world parliament of Rotary. You can change the Rotary policy and legislation and direct them to act on this, ask them to consider acting on this through that democratic process. So I urge every district represented here to consider doing that, and think about all of your classmates as district governors or district governors elect or district governor nominees, and how you and the 530 districts of the world can influence change from the grassroots to Rotary International. Thank you.
Thank you, David. Thank you, Ira. And I'll now call on Chan to thank you more formally.
Can I just say one quick thing in conclusion? The stuff that I talk about is really depressing. I want to make sure that I don't leave people depressed because I'm personally not a very depressed person. I'm an optimistic person. As I tried to explain, and I'm not sure I did this adequately well, this really is not, these horrible things I talked about are not the future that need to be. This is completely in our hands. We have the ability to do something about this. And I think that if we can mobilize the resources available to us through our international Rotary family, as I said at the Peace Conference in Ontario in January, we can save the world. And we ought to do that with a sense of responsibility, but with a sense of great hope. We should undertake this work and understand that we have it in our power to get rid of these weapons, to preserve humanity, and to enable us to be able to then move on and deal with all the other problems that our human family has to face in the coming decades. But in the process of doing this, in the process of getting rid of nuclear weapons, we are going to create cooperation among nations that will then be useful in addressing the other issues like climate change that we are going to need to work on. We're going to build trust across borders. It's going to have to happen as we do this work. And so this is an enormous opportunity, not just to deal with this problem, but to create the conditions that will help us deal with the other problems that we face. Thanks.
Yeah. Dr. Ira Halfhand, it's our privilege to associate with a person like you who has such abundant knowledge in nuclear weapons, and your commitment to abolish nuclear weapons is felt by listening to your heartthrob, which says abolish nuclear weapons. This is like a contagion effect which had made our hearts to resonate with you and echo the same. Your drive ignites our desire and converts it into a burning motivation to see that we all unitedly take this journey to reach our destination called nuke-free planet. I feel that now, after listening to you, it is imperative that if we do not abolish nuclear weapons, definitely sooner or later that these would be launched intentionally or accidentally or due to design flaws. I'm sure we all Rotarians collectively are going to preserve this planet. Hence, it is of paramount importance to abolish nuclear weapons. I'm also sure that all the participants, organizers, some of the delegates of UN, global participants, and the social activists have felt that your message is powerful, valuable, and beneficial for a peaceful planet. On behalf of the participants, including me, would like to thank you wholeheartedly for a wonderful and exciting message that we will see a sustainable planet for our future generations only when we get rid of these nuclear weapons. Yes, we join our hands with you in this endeavor to create a nukes-free planet. We say in India, Vasudhaiva Kutumbikam, which means the world is of one family. Let's spread love, peace, and harmony. Prosperity automatically follows that. I say, Jai Hind. Namaste. Thank you.
Thank you, Chand, and thank you everyone for listening today.
Thank you, Mr. Chand. I will go next. Good morning and good evening, everyone. I'm Shweta Jayachandar, a member of the Rotary Club of Jubilee Hills of District 3150. I want to start by thanking Mr. Ira for that informative note. I'm also pleased to introduce our speaker, Dr. Tara Rosdenko, Managing Director, Nuclear Policy and Non-Proliferation. Tara is an alumni of University of California at Los Angeles. She has to her credit a degree in science and a PhD in physics. Tara has over a decade of experience in the national security field, managing complex government programs and supervising teams of talented researchers at both the US State and the Treasury departments. She also has a PhD in plasma physics and has worked for the US Navy on issues related to weapons of mass destruction, and for the US State Department on non-proliferation and arms control issues. In addition, Tara is also an excellent leader who brings out the best in her people who work with her and inspires trust. She is an asset to the organization. She lives in Madison, Wisconsin with her husband and son. She enjoys outdoors summertime and time with family and friends. Over to you, Mrs. Tara.
Thank you. Is someone going to introduce David? Because he and I are doing
this. Yes. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everyone. I'm Rotarian Sheila Ramakrishnan, past president and current TRF chair from the Rotary Club of Jubilee Hills, 3150. I'm delighted to have the opportunity to introduce our co-presenter today, David Combs. Passionate about peace and disarmament, David has been extremely active and vocal in this space. He holds a master's degree in public administration from Roosevelt University and a BA in art, entertainment, and media management from Columbia College, Chicago. When the going gets tough, David uses his other arm in the liberal arts to get an equilibrium. He is the Midwest Outreach Coordinator for the Global Security Program at the Union of Concerned Scientists. His strength lies in building coalitions and partnerships among UCS members and other groups to push for United States leadership on nuclear weapons issues. Prior to joining UCS, David organized the Midwest, the One Campaign, a nonprofit that advocates for legislation in support of US global aid. He also served on the board of the local United Nations Association chapter in Chicago. Welcome, Tara and David.
Thank you so much for those lovely introductions. I'm going to share my screen with everybody now so that you can see a presentation that David and I have developed. So just give me a moment. Okay, if you can't see it, raise your hand or let me know. I just want to first of all say thank you for having me here. I appreciate so much this invitation and the opportunity to talk to everybody. As the introducer said, my name is Tara, and I work at the Outrider Foundation. The Outrider Foundation is in Madison, Wisconsin. It is an educational and advocacy organization that focuses on nuclear weapons and climate change, and I manage the nuclear weapons mission area.
Hello, good morning, good evening, everyone. As was so kindly said, my name is David. I work with the Union of Concerned Scientists, also a United States-based advocacy organization. We advocate for science and fact-based policymaking. Again, as was mentioned, I work with specifically the nuclear weapons campaign at the Union of Concerned Scientists, and much of what Tara and I are going to share today has been work that we've done relative to the United States and work that we've tried to develop in towns and communities here in the US. However, I greatly hope that the strategies, tactics, and techniques that we're able to talk about today are adaptable wherever we are from and wherever we live.
So many people are concerned about nuclear weapons, but there are barriers to acting on it because nuclear weapons can be quite intimidating. People may tell themselves, well, there's really nothing I can do about this. This is the province of governments, and they may be sort of stopped in their impulses to help because they think there's nothing they can do. And Ira has talked about this already quite a bit, but David and I are going to talk about that a little bit more, some concrete ways that individuals can take action. Another barrier to action is that we have so many things that we're concerned about right now. We have the pandemic on our minds. People are worried about climate change, the environment, economic inequality, social injustice. You may not have enough time in the day to add yet another concern onto the other things that you are worried about. But I think that people may not realize the interconnectedness of all of these issues. Making and maintaining nuclear weapons is risky business, and we shift that risk onto communities that are already marginalized. Here in the US, because of our nuclear weapons program, we have increased cancer rates in our indigenous communities. We have environmental contamination in low-income neighborhoods. Nuclear weapons are already harming the most vulnerable people in our society. And we ask these already marginalized communities to take on a greater burden of risk for the fiction of keeping the rest of us safe.
As Ira so clearly described just a few minutes ago, nuclear weapons have the very real ability to impact the lives of each and every one of us living on this planet. And every community in every nation lives every day at risk of the devastating consequences of a nuclear conflict. But we on this call are in positions of unique and extraordinary power, and we must recognize that. For those of us living in some of the very few nations that hold nuclear weapons, we have an increased responsibility to step forward and to do something. And again, as Ira mentioned earlier, as Rotarians, we are part of an extremely powerful cohort of chapters and organizations around the world that has already accomplished great things, namely eradicating polio from the planet. And we do have a responsibility to use that power for good and to step forward within the confines of the four-way test, as I've seen so many times in the chat box today, but to step forward and to do what we can to solve this problem.
By the way, I'm seeing something on my screen and I don't know where that came from. So I apologize if you're seeing a strange red schmear. I don't know how to get rid of it and I don't know where, anyway, but we'll just move on. So what can you do about nuclear weapons? A lot, actually. The first thing you can do is start with educating yourself. And your attendance at this meeting is important. And it's one way that you can begin to make a difference on nuclear weapons. Most people have no idea how destructive nuclear weapons are and how much of a threat they still are. And most people don't realize that nuclear weapons are already hurting people, even without being used. And I mentioned this earlier in connection with the undue burden on communities that are already on the margins. So begin to take time to learn about this issue. Learn about how much your government is spending on nuclear weapons and pay attention to when the budget is passed. Pay attention to proposals for new weapons or upgrades. You could also take the next step and form a discussion group in your community that focuses on nuclear weapons. You could meet regularly to talk about what you've learned. You could discuss a book and invite guest speakers. This is the very first step in making a difference on nuclear weapons. The next thing that you could do after you've educated yourself is you could get organized. Ira mentioned that in the early 1980s here in the United States, there was a grassroots movement called the Nuclear Freeze Movement, and that opposed the Reagan administration's proposal for a massive buildup of nuclear weapons. And that movement's pressure on the Reagan administration helped to begin arms limitation negotiations with the Soviet Union. In the United States, groups like Physicians for Social Responsibility and the Union of Concerned Scientists are building new grassroots movements like there's a Back from the Brink campaign that Ira may not have mentioned, but it is a 5-point plan for eliminating nuclear weapons. Internationally, as Ira mentioned, the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons is activating the international community to work together and to create change. And as you probably all know, in 2017, ICANN won the Nobel Peace Prize for their role in advocating for the United Nations Nuclear Ban Treaty. So regular citizens are at the heart of all of these efforts, and the more people that participate, the stronger and louder the movement will be. So think about getting involved as a volunteer, using your platforms within the Rotary Club. Consider donating money, consider signing on to the TPNW.
One of the most significant challenges that I've come across so far in this work is the very first question of where we begin. In other words, what do we do first? And as Rotarians, we come into this issue and this question at a great advantage, because the first thing that we must do is we must find our community. We must find that community of people, the community of groups in our towns and our cities who also care about these issues and care enough to take a step forward. Again, as Rotarians, we are connected to our communities already in very deep and meaningful ways. And I would propose that that is an opportunity for us to expand the community of people activating and advocating on this nuclear weapons problem. These massive grassroots movements are fantastic and effective, as we've seen in years and decades past. But please don't be discouraged if you don't see one around you yet in the United States or India or Pakistan or the UK or wherever you may be. Pictured here on the slide is a very small group from Evanston, a relatively small town here in Illinois that also happens to be Rotary International's headquarters location. And this is a small group of some Rotarians, faith leaders, local politicians, and also just engaged residents and professionals who came together to advocate for and pass a resolution in the Evanston City Council. That was a very small group, as you can see, but we were able to do something that communicated a clear message to our government here in the United States that all of us at the local level care enough to step forward on these issues and to call on, at the very least, our local governments to take a step forward. And if that community, if that group doesn't exist around you yet, I would encourage you to build one. In the United States, as Tara mentioned, Back from the Brink is a campaign that was designed specifically to provide the tools here in the US to bring about conditions for successful advocacy to change the United States nuclear weapons policy. At the international level, ICANN has similar tools available, and I would encourage you to reach out to Ira and others here who have led that movement for so long to get better connected to those tools if you're interested and willing. Of course, this is all much easier said than done, especially during this time of the global pandemic that we're all living under. One example that was made very strongly to me just a few days ago is that if the tables were turned, if we imagine that for just a moment, if we were living today in the unimaginable scenario of a nuclear conflict playing out, and we were advocating or we were calling for change to policies and the direction of our world to avoid a global pandemic, it would be difficult. It would be difficult to appeal to leaders and policymakers to think about this threat while they are perceiving another threat at the same time. And that is, in the opposite way, what we live under right now. And so please, if you struggle with that, or if you are interested in resources to elevate this dire threat of nuclear weapons that, as Ira has said, we must address now. We cannot afford to wait. Please reach out to Tara, Ira, myself, or Anne, and we would be happy and honored to get you connected to those that we know around you who are already beginning to do that work.
Another thing you can do is talk to your elected officials. You can write them, call them, email them, tweet at them. There are many ways to be heard. In the United States, many representatives receive donation money from powerful companies that make nuclear weapons, like Northrop Grumman and Boeing. So one thing that we do here is we tell our officials to represent our best interests and not those of nuclear lobbyists. So if you've been educating yourself and following the funding process for nuclear weapons, you can weigh in at key moments in that process.
Now, I'd like to focus just for a moment on the US system of government specifically. What you see here are pictures of ordinary citizens from the Midwestern United States, from Michigan, Illinois, Wisconsin, Minnesota, who in some cases near their homes and in some cases in Washington, D.C. have met with their policymakers, their elected officials, and carried these issues forward and ask those hard questions. What are you going to do? What are your positions? What are you willing to do to help us eliminate these weapons and prevent nuclear war? And importantly, each and every meeting at the highest of levels of the government in the United States came about in the same way. People asked. Whether that was through a written letter, a call, an email, the key was in simply asking that question. And in the United States, at the very least, the elected officials and those who go to Washington, D.C. to represent us are listening. And that need not be, as Ira said, a partisan or a political, in this sense of the word, question that we ask them, but we ask them as our leaders and our government officials to make responsible decisions and make decisions that are in the best interest of all of us in our nation and around the world. And I would encourage those of you on this call in nations other than the United States, if you have that ability in your system to write a letter, to make a call, those calls do not go unheard. When government officials and elected officials rely on votes, rely on elections to maintain their office, maintain their job, maintain their position of influence, they are listening. And every letter, every call, every email is documented and heard and understood to be important to the people that officials represent. Finally, during these times when so many very valid issues demand attention and make headlines every day, again, like COVID-19, only your voice in your town, in your congressional district in the United States, in your state, in your province, only your voice can ensure that nuclear weapons are not lost in this shuffle. Without our voices and without our demand that these issues be addressed, they simply will not be heard.
Next, when deciding whom to vote for, you can learn about the candidate's stances on nuclear weapons, and you can make it a factor in your vote. Even on the local and state level, if a candidate doesn't have a public stance, write them or call their office to see where they stand. It's important to do that so that you can show candidates that it's an issue the public cares about. And those candidates at the local and state level may move on in their careers to bigger and better things, and getting them into the idea that the public cares about nuclear weapons early in their career is a good thing to do.
First and foremost, and especially, again, for those of us coming into an election year in the United States, yes, please vote. That is a responsibility and a privilege that we have. But regardless of the nation that we live in or the system that we live within, it's important for us to recognize that there is a long history on many issues, nuclear weapons and otherwise, of the public, of citizens, of groups, and of community influencers stepping up and demanding that an issue be addressed. And at the very least, this is something that we can do. We can speak up. We can create a unified voice around the world through all of our nations and all of the groups that we're connected to make clear that we will not tolerate and we will not accept a government or set of governments functioning and moving on day to day without at least addressing these issues. We have a unique opportunity during election times to raise those issues in a way that might be heard even just a little bit more, because officials and candidates for office are out and they're traveling and trying to generate votes. But regardless of the time and regardless of whether or not we are in the midst of an election, speaking up and making clear that we will not let a day go by without hearing from our officials on their positions and on their intentions is absolutely vital.
So Ira mentioned the Don't Bank on the Bomb, which is a wonderful resource that you could look at if you haven't seen it before. It mentions every company that's involved in nuclear weapons production, investment, and every bank that's aiding those companies in that whole enterprise. And also, Richard Denton mentioned that Rotary is invested in General Dynamics. And so one thing that Rotary could do is consider divesting. On the more personal side, personal investing is complicated, and many people can't name every company they or their bank or their retirement fund invests in. But you can make sure that your own investments are in socially responsible stocks or in socially responsible funds that screen for nuclear weapons. You could also donate money to an organization that works towards nuclear arms reduction. Oops, let's go back one more, sorry. Lastly, you can consider your professional platform. Wherever you are, whoever you are, you have something to offer. And I have 4 examples of professionals who have decided to apply their expertise to the nuclear weapons problem. The first is Ira, of course. So Ira is a practicing physician, but he's also spent decades advocating against nuclear weapons. He has successfully leveraged his professional expertise to talk about the medical consequences of nuclear weapons. He writes about these issues, provides leadership to national and international organizations. And here in the US, whenever there's polling done to talk about who are trusted types of messengers, physicians are always some of the most trusted professionals for Americans to hear about any issue, actually. This is Smriti Kashari. She's a filmmaker and an artist. So she uses the mediums of film, art, and photography to draw attention to the issue of nuclear weapons. Smriti co-produced a film called The Bomb that premiered at film festivals around the world and is now available on Netflix. She worked with my own organization to develop a short film for social media that shows how to take apart a nuclear bomb. This is Seth Sheldon. Mr. Sheldon is a partner at a law firm in New York and an adjunct professor at the City University of New York School of Law. But he is also the United Nations liaison for the International Campaign to Abolish Nuclear Weapons. He assists governments in signing, ratifying, and otherwise acceding to the treaty on the prohibition of nuclear weapons. And he represents ICANN in promoting the entry into force of the universalization of the treaty. And finally, this is Dr. Tommy Rock. Dr. Rock is a scientist and a member of the Navajo Nation, which is an indigenous nation in the American Southwest. And in 2015, while he was still a doctoral student, he helped discover more than a decade of uranium contamination in the drinking water of a small community in eastern Arizona. As a member of the Navajo Nation, Dr. Rock and his family have been personally impacted by US nuclear weapons. His grandfather was a uranium miner and died of cancer related to his work in the uranium mines. Dr. Rock not only researches uranium contamination as a scientist, but he speaks publicly about his experiences and has testified before the US Congress. So that is it. I'm going to stop sharing my screen now and turn it back to moderators.
So I will begin with the first question to Tara. So you spoke as voting as one of the strategies. What about a country like India, where the large part of the population is not really aware of the stance that leaderships take on matters such as nuclear proliferation? Are there some strategies that you have used in countries with low literacy rates in the past?
So my organization has not worked in countries outside of the US, but I would say that in the United States, actually, a lot of American citizens are not super aware of what our government is doing on nuclear weapons. And so I think the principles are the same. I think you maybe go back to the very first step then, when you focus on education and educating yourself and educating your communities for a while. And once you feel like you've built up a good base of informed citizens, then you can move through the process of getting organized and all that sort of thing. So my advice is take that very first step and get going in that very first direction of getting educated.
Thank you.
Okay.
I have another question over here. This is to David. Dr. Halfhand also spoke about it. I mean, in the sense, there's a perceived reduction in threat from nukes due to more sophisticated and covert methods of warfare like AI or biowarfare, and taking into account the current pandemic that we're facing. So what do you think about advocating for disbandment of all weapons of mass destruction and not just nukes?
So I would take a crack at that, but also Ira, if you have anything to add. I actually echo what Ira said just a little bit ago, that all of these and other issues are completely valid and very real risks. AI is a extremely powerful emerging technology with, of course, potentially greatly positive and negative consequences. But nuclear weapons in particular are an issue that we live under the threat of every single day. Ira was not exaggerating or stretching the truth at all to say that there is every possibility that a nuclear conflict could have begun during this call, and there is very little that we could have done to stop it, and there's very little that we could do to prepare for it. In fact, there is nothing that we could do to adequately prepare for it as individuals or as a human species. And so the nuclear weapons problem and the nuclear weapons threat is one that we must deal with, and we must deal with immediately. That being said, the other issues of weapons of mass destruction, of more conventional warfare issues, are issues that we can and should discuss and work towards solutions as well. But there is a particular sense of urgency specifically with regard to nuclear weapons.
Thank you.
I have a little bit to add to that too, if it's okay.
Yes, Sarah.
So I would note, and maybe everyone's already aware of this, that chemical weapons and biological weapons are already prohibited. So chemical weapons have been banned since 97 and biological weapons since 1975. And all of the permanent members of the UN Security Council have signed on to both of those treaties. So we have already, as a global community, decided that those weapons are they should be banned and no one should be developing them. That's not to say that people don't. Syria is an example. You can see Syria has used chemical weapons on their own people, even though they signed on to the treaty. But we have stigmatized those weapons already, and I think that this is sort of the inspiration for the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. We've stigmatized chemical and biological weapons. Why can't we do the same for nuclear weapons?
I'd just like to thank again
Thank you, Tara.
Tara and David, as well as Shela and Sweta. And I'll now ask more questions. If people have a question, please write it in the chat line, is the best way. I do see the occasional hand, and we'll try to get them after the chat line. I have a question, though, for maybe Ira or David or Tara, and that deals with nuclear power. What is the role of nuclear power, and how does that contribute to nuclear weapons? And should we be opposing nuclear power, or is Atoms for Peace an acceptable program?
Richard, from my perspective, nuclear power, the technology involved in the nuclear power program is indistinguishable from the technology involved in the development of nuclear weapons. And the North Koreans, the Indians, the Israelis, the Pakistanis have all developed their nuclear weapons from what were supposed to be civilian reactors as part of nuclear research or nuclear power programs. I think it's impossible to say that we need to eliminate nuclear weapons and at the same time promote nuclear power. At the same time, again, I think it's the kind of thing that David was talking about just a minute ago. We really need to keep the focus where the focus needs to be. And while I certainly wouldn't advocate nuclear power, I think we need to keep the focus very, very tightly on nuclear weapons. It's the weapons that are going to blow up the planet. Sometimes I think any activity that people are engaged in to eliminate nuclear power, I think, is all to the good. But I kind of wish they were working on nuclear weapons more.
David, Tara?
Personally, I'm a little bit agnostic about nuclear power. It doesn't worry me nearly as much as the nuclear weapons do. I think there are certainly issues with it, like waste. And Ira has mentioned a couple of instances of cheating. But I think for the most part, historically, countries have taken that grand bargain that the NPT gave us and behaved. However, that said, I do think that I agree with Ira. Our focus should be on nuclear weapons, and that's the immediate threat.
Okay, a question here. And actually there were several. One is from Francis Jeffries. What are the best sources and materials to use in preparing presentations in our communities?
So I could speak to that just briefly. If you're based in the United States, I would encourage you to visit preventsnuclearwar.org. I'll put that in the chat box as well. But this website is the home of the Back from the Brink campaign that Tara and I had mentioned along the way. And this is specifically designed to provide those tools for specifically the context of United States nuclear weapons policy. So if you're based in the United States, I would encourage you to give that website a visit. And I imagine, Ira, that there are similar tools available within ICANN's resources from an international perspective.
Yeah, the ICANN website is also a very valuable resource. It's www.icanw, International Campaign Abolish Nuclear Weapons, icanw.org. And the website of the International Physicians for the Prevention of Nuclear War also has a lot of material on it. That's www.ippnw.org.
And I would put a little plug in too for the outrider.org website. We have a bunch of educational materials on our website. They're not in a form that you could immediately do a presentation about, but you could certainly go there and learn about the topic that you are looking to look, to talk about, and then translate that. We have a online tool where you can select a city and detonate a bomb and look at the consequences in terms of casualties. And we also have some short videos that are educational, like how to take apart a bomb. And then lots of articles that are historic that give you sort of, take you from how to, the beginnings in 1942 to how we got where we are today. So I would put a plug in there, and I'll put that in the chat box too.
And so maybe I could just call on Anne. You've also prepared how to do a talk at Rotary, I believe.
We have a Rotary Club presentation, excuse me, and I've already sent it out to all of you.
Perfect.
You can do it yourself. You don't need anybody. There's a wonderful video. And if you don't have internet in your club room, I can get you a file copy.
Thank you very much, Anne. Question here from Raghu Alam. Plastics and oil dumping were taken seriously as an environmental issue and all countries acted promptly. Why is nuclear weapons not taken as seriously? Tara, David, Ira?
I mean, I can start, and then I'm sure the others have things to weigh in on. Ira mentioned this in his talk, and in answer to a question as well. There is this doctrine of deterrence that's pretty pervasive in governments that have nuclear weapons, and it's very accepted and almost with religious fervor. So it's difficult to persuade people that are convinced that we need nuclear weapons for our security, that in fact, we would be more secure without them. So I think that that's one of the main barriers.
In addition to that, nuclear weapons are sources of very tangible power and influence. The United States, just as an example, very clearly and quite obviously when we look at some of the policies that the United States makes, uses its arsenal, its nuclear weapons, to influence its allies. We maintain what's called colloquially the nuclear umbrella, that is sort of building on the theory of deterrence that Tara just described. The premise that the United States will use its nuclear weapons if necessary to protect its allies. That is unlike some of the issues that were just described there, oil dumping and so on. That brings a disproportionate amount of political power and influence on the global stage to nations like the United States and others that have significant nuclear arsenals. So the problem is I don't think one of getting the issue to be taken seriously. The problem is that we're not just addressing a threat here. We are addressing, yes, a threat and yes, a problem, but it is a threat and a problem that also brings a disproportionate amount of power to those that possess that threat.
Thank you. Sharada, I see you have your hand up. Would you like to unmute and ask a question?
Yes, in United States, it is difficult to get rid of guns. So it's all the issue of personal safety. So talking to people in the United States, it's not easy. But however, we can get the spiritual leaders or the highly spiritually oriented people to spread the message.
If I could comment to that, I think the gun problem in the United States and in some other countries, though mainly here in the US, is very similar to the nuclear weapons problem. There's something about power that is seductive, and people feel that things that make them more powerful make them safe. And it's important for people to understand that there is a distinction between being very powerful and being very safe. What most people are looking for is safety, but they buy into this notion that having power confers that safety on them. With guns in the United States, we know that a family that has a gun in the house is much more likely to have somebody killed by a gun than one which doesn't. And it's usually their own gun that does the killing. The data is absolutely clear on this. If you bring a gun into your home, you increase the chance that somebody in your family will die. But it is sort of working against human psychology to get people to understand that. And we have the same problem when we're talking about nuclear weapons. People have this very strong belief that this enormously powerful weapon must make them safer. And it's one of the real jobs we have is to help people understand that that's not true. In the past, perhaps it was true. If you had more powerful weapons than an enemy, maybe you were safer. But if the weapons are suicide bombs, which nuclear weapons are, that is no longer the case. And that's part of the educational lesson that we need to bring to the general public, that these weapons, we need to explain very clearly and carefully how these weapons undermine people's security. Now, I think it's going to be easier to get rid of nuclear weapons in the world than to get rid of guns in the United States. There are 14,000 nuclear warheads. They're held by 9 governments. In the US, there are like 350 million guns held by literally hundreds of millions of individual people. And so the process of getting those guns safely out of people's hands is going to be much more difficult. But the decision to get rid of the nuclear arsenals requires only the decision to be made by 9 governments. And it's a decision that has already been made by the many governments which have decided not to have nuclear weapons. So I think that's going to be an easier task for us.
I would just add one thought to that. Dennis, you put in the chat box here, how do we address the issues of power and prestige? I feel like Ira just answered that with information and with educational material, with facts. And to Ira's point that in order to solve the gun problem, at least in the United States, we would need to convince and change the minds of millions of people. I would propose anyway, that we don't need to change anyone's mind to solve the nuclear weapons problem. We simply need to make the truth and the facts inescapable. And we need to create the conditions where these 9 governments cannot avoid and cannot escape making decisions based on the facts. It feels like an important distinction because it is something that we can actually do. We may not ever convince the entire population of the United States or any nation that power factually does not make us more safe in this scenario, but we can continue to educate ourselves, educate others, and make the truth inescapable.
Thank you very much, David. Here's a question. It's not directly on nuclear, but I think there's often many paths up the mountain. And this question is the thought of universal basic income help bringing people together. And would that help to bring peace in the world? And would that help to, again, then eliminate nuclear weapons? Comments from David, Tara?
My only comment would be that nuclear weapons demand a massive and inappropriate amount of resources. In the United States alone, we are projected right now to spend $1 trillion over the next 30 years on nuclear weapons. If those dollars were reallocated and redirected toward programs like universal basic income or other issues and facets of all of our nation's functioning that are currently underfunded, one of the byproducts would be that those dollars would no longer be flowing into nuclear weapons. And so I think from a financial and mathematical standpoint, there is a benefit there. And to address that element of bringing people closer, I think there's a tie there to what Ira just said, that there is a thought and widespread belief that power makes us safer. And if we're safe, then we feel closer to those around us. If we're able to make the truth more widely known and understood, that this power does not make us safer, and that giving up that power actually makes us safer, then first and foremost, we are able to make progress on the nuclear weapons issues. But second, then there becomes a greater availability of resources to fund programs like a universal basic income and other things.
Thank you, David. And this is another question directed to you, David, from Subra. Do you think that we need to change the mindset of deterrence against safety of a country or their superiority?
The short answer is yes. The Union of Concerned Scientists in our expert and sort of research and scientific area of the organization has done an extensive amount of research and analysis into deterrence theory and the principles and policies that deterrence is built on. And the truth of the matter is deterrence theory is not sound. The data is not there to back it up, and there are no facts, there's no science to say that deterrence theory actually works and actually makes us safer. And so as an organization, the Union of Concerned Scientists is working very hard to spread that information and to make it clear that deterrence is not an increase in safety, and it's not a policy that is conducive to successful diplomacy between nations.
Thank you. I'm going to actually just use my prerogative here to ask Barbara Mueller. I see that she's on here, and she's been involved with the United Nations and Secretary General Antonio Guterres's plan to our request to have a ceasefire so that we could do with COVID. Did you just want to comment on that, Barbara? Yeah, you'll need to unmute. Nope. Maybe she's not able to unmute or is not there. She just asked a question, but any other questions? I don't see here on the chat line. Here's one. Ira, David, and Tara, can you help us with regular communication messages that can be shared with Rotarians at regular intervals? These messages will help educating and encouraging participation of more Rotarians across the nation. Could also just mention that Rotarians for Nuclear Ban does send out a few things, but again, Ira, David, Tara?
I'd be happy to help in any way that I can. If somebody wants to talk about something like a regular scheduled communication, maybe after this meeting, I'd be happy to talk with someone about that.
And if anybody's on the call and is not on the mailing list for Rotarians for Ban, I would encourage you to make sure that Richard gets your name, because that list has become sort of de facto a kind of newsletter where we send out information to people. And so that's sort of a really good structure for doing that.
Here's another question from Rosalind Cook. Tara, can you say the name of the artist that you had mentioned?
Yeah, sure. It's Spriti Kashari. I'll type her name in the chat.
Okay. From Dennis Wong. Need more examples where power does not make us safe. Can I open that up to anyone there?
One of the examples that's come up already is the example of chemical weapons. Chemical weapons are now stigmatized by the international community because there was an agreement, a widespread agreement, that power did not make us more safe. It made all of us more unsafe. And again, Tara pointed this out when she mentioned chemical weapons, that sort of agreement and stigmatization was, while a positive thing and successful, does not and did not guarantee that chemical weapons are never created and never used, but was a step forward and provided a mechanism and a standard that as a planet and as an international community, we recognize that this power does not make any of us more safe.
Okay, thank you very much. Now I'd like to call on Sweta and Sheila to wrap things up.
Mrs. Tara Drozdenko and David Combs for taking the time to be with us today and helping us with an informative session on nuclear proliferation and suggesting grassroots measures at the individual and at the community level to combat it, and addressing the interconnectedness between nuclear weapons, climate change, citizen activism, social injustice, etc. We assure you Rotary's support in this important issue.
Right, I'll just pitch in with a last minute appeal after that very inspiring evening that we've had and redirecting our focus to the importance of banning nuclear weapons. We have the ask for the Japanese survivors, and we all remember the horrors of Hiroshima remain etched in their memories. And we don't need to make new mistakes. We can just learn from old ones. And so the very fact that there is a possession of this kind of power and artillery is itself a threat, as we have seen from this evening's talk. So as an advocate for world peace, request you to please sign the appeal for Japanese survivors in banning nuclear weapons. I have done my bit. So let's add momentum as Rotarians and propel the planet towards a more peaceful and sustainable way of life. And this is an ask from all of us. And I do that on everybody's behalf, for ourselves, for our children, and our grandchildren. I think Richard has already put out the link there. Otherwise, you could, the link is there in the invitation. Please sign the appeal. Thank you.
Thank you, Sheila. I'm Namrita Suri, Rotary District 3011, and Peace Chair for my district and member of the organizing group for this event. I call on each of you to commit to something today. Maybe just signing the appeal as Rotarian Sheila has suggested to do. We may have differences of opinion, I'm sure we do. But I'm quite sure that no one here wants a nuclear catastrophe. We don't want that, whether by war or by accident. We sure don't want it. So I'll cut it short. Thank you for being with us today. I thank Kathy Hewitt and Paul Perez and Rotary District 5960 for hosting us. Thanks to Rotary Districts 3011, 3020, 3181, 3150, and 7010, and the organizer Rotary clubs for their hosting as well. Thanks to our speakers, organizers, everyone here. Let us start to work together and see that we can do to prevent a humanitarian disaster for our only planet. Bye-bye, everybody.
Dr. DG Shivnaran Garu, thank you for joining, sir. I'm sorry we couldn't add your message into it. Thank you, everyone.